Richard Lawson was a man who had it all: wealth, fame, and what many believed to be a perfect family. A self-made millionaire in the tech industry, Richard lived in a mansion on the outskirts of Beverly Hills with his two young children, Emma 8 and Noah 5. Ever since his wife, Claire, passed away in a tragic car accident 3 years ago, Richard had tried his best to balance fatherhood and his demanding business empire. To the world, the Lawsons appeared happy. But behind those luxurious walls, Richard was struggling. His kids had become distant, quiet, and afraid of something he couldn't identify. Emma had stopped sleeping in her own room, and Noah often woke up crying in the middle of the night. At first, Richard thought it was just grief, the loss of their mother still haunting them. But when Emma told him she didn't like the man who watches us at night, everything changed. The disturbing signs begin. Richard tried to stay calm. He told Emma that no one was watching them and that she must have had a nightmare. But she insisted. He comes when the lights go off, she whispered one night, trembling. He talks to Noah. He says Mommy wants to take us away. Richard's blood ran cold. He immediately called his security company to review footage from the house's external cameras, but nothing seemed out of place. The system covered every entrance and hallway, yet he couldn't find any sign of an intruder. Still, his gut told him something was wrong. So he decided to upgrade everything. Within 48 hours, Richard installed a full set of motion-activated cameras, hidden ones, too, throughout the mansion, including the kids' playroom, the stairways, and the hall outside their bedrooms. He even placed one in the children's room, hidden inside a stuffed bear. He didn't tell anyone, not even his housekeeper, Mrs. Porter, who had worked for the family since before his wife's death. That night, Richard sat in his office, staring at the live feeds on his phone. The kids were asleep, everything was quiet, the clock ticked past midnight, then 1 a.m., then 2. Nothing. He almost gave up and shut off the monitor. But then, at 3:02 a.m., movement flickered across the screen. The man in the shadows. On the feed from the hallway, Richard saw a dark figure, tall, wearing what looked like a hooded jacket, standing just outside Emma and Noah's room. He froze. His heart pounded. The man didn't move at first, he just stood there, watching the door, tilting his head slightly as if listening. Then, slowly, the figure reached for the doorknob and pushed it open. Richard couldn't breathe. He tapped into the hidden camera inside the room, and what he saw made him drop his phone. The man was inside. He walked quietly to Noah's bed and sat down beside the sleeping boy. Then he spoke in a low, raspy voice. Don't worry, little one, Mommy's here. Noah stirred but didn't wake. The intruder leaned closer, brushing his fingers against the child's hair. Richard's shock turned to rage and fear. He grabbed his phone and dialed 911. This is Richard Lawson, he stammered. Someone's in my house, my children's room. Please send the police immediately. The dispatcher kept him on the line as Richard rushed upstairs, baseball bat in hand. He burst into the hallway, but when he opened the door to the kids' room, the man was gone. The window was still locked. No sign of forced entry. Emma and Noah were fast asleep. Richard searched every corner of the room, under the beds, inside the closets, nothing. When the police arrived minutes later, they found no trace of an intruder. Still, when Richard showed them the camera footage, the officers exchanged uneasy glances. Sir, are you sure this isn't edited? One of them asked. You think I'd fake something like this? Richard shouted. Look at him, he's touching my son. The next morning, Richard was exhausted but determined to get answers. He hired a private investigator named Laura Grant, a former detective who specialized in domestic surveillance. She installed new encrypted cameras, ran thermal sensors, and tested for electromagnetic interference. If someone's sneaking in, she told him, we'll catch them. But there's something strange about that footage. It looks like a data glitch, or someone hacked the system. Over the next few nights, Richard barely slept. Every morning, he reviewed the footage. Every night, the same thing happened. 3:02 a.m., movement, static, then silence. Emma began drawing pictures of a man in a dark hoodie. When Richard asked who it was, she said, that's the man who talks to Noah. He says Mommy's cold and wants us to come play with her. Richard's hands shook as he held the drawing. He didn't believe in ghosts, but the timing, the strange behavior, and his children's fear, it all pointed to something he couldn't explain. Laura, meanwhile, began digging into the mansion's history. What she discovered sent chills down her spine. The hidden past. Before Richard bought the estate, it had belonged to a reclusive film director named Alan Crane, a man infamous for his obsession with the supernatural. He'd built a hidden basement under the house, supposedly for film editing. But neighbors had reported strange noises, screams, and flickering lights late at night. Crane had died mysteriously in 2007, and the property had sat abandoned for years before Richard purchased it. Laura suggested checking the basement. Richard agreed, though he'd never seen one on the house plans. Using a thermal scanner, they found it, a concealed door behind the wine cellar wall. Inside was a narrow staircase leading down to a soundproofed room filled with old surveillance equipment, broken cameras, and, disturbingly, a child's toy box. On one wall hung dozens of photos, children's photos, all taken at night, all from strange angles. In the corner, a dusty monitor flickered to life. The screen showed live feeds of Richard's house, the same camera angles he'd installed upstairs. Someone was still watching. The real intruder. Laura traced the network connection. The signal wasn't external, it was coming from inside the house. At that moment, Richard's phone buzzed. A new notification, greater than, motion detected, kids' room. He and Laura sprinted upstairs. When they burst into the children's room, the lights flickered, and standing near Noah's bed was Mrs. Porter, the housekeeper. But something about her face made Richard stop cold. Her eyes were empty, her hands trembling as she reached toward Noah. Greater than, Mrs. Porter, he whispered. What are you doing? She turned slowly, clutching the stuffed bear camera. Greater than, he said I had to protect them, she muttered. He said she's coming for them tonight. Richard moved forward carefully. Who's coming? Mrs. Porter's voice cracked. Greater than, the woman in white. I see her every night. She says she's their mother. At that moment, Emma screamed, pointing behind Richard. He spun around, and for a split second, he swore he saw a pale figure standing by the door. A woman's silhouette, long hair flowing, face blurred, before vanishing into thin air. The bear camera fell from Mrs. Porter's hands and shattered. She collapsed, sobbing uncontrollably. The truth revealed. Police arrived soon after. They found evidence in the basement linking the house's old surveillance system to hidden tunnels that ran beneath the property, remnants from the original owner's secret operations. But the apparitions, and the strange footage, that part was never fully explained. Investigators believed someone, possibly a former staff member or an obsessed stalker, had hacked into the new camera system using the old wiring, creating fabricated images using digital overlays. The goal, it seemed, was to terrorize the family, perhaps to force them out of the house. Mrs. Porter was taken to a psychiatric hospital, where she admitted to hearing voices and following the instructions of someone who had been messaging her through an anonymous account, claiming to be Claire's spirit. When police traced the account, they found it linked to a disgruntled former employee of Richard's company, a software engineer he had fired for data theft. The man had been using the mansion's outdated systems to spy and manipulate footage remotely. Epilogue. The night he'll never forget. Months passed. The mansion was cleared of all old wiring and completely rebuilt with new security. Richard sold the house and moved into a quieter home near the ocean. He tried to rebuild his life and focus on his children's healing. One evening, as they watched the sunset, Emma asked, Greater than, Daddy, is Mommy still watching us? Richard smiled faintly and hugged her close. Greater than, maybe, sweetheart. But if she is, she's watching over us from heaven, not from the cameras. That night, for the first time in months, the house was silent. No alerts, no motion sensors, no shadows at 3 a.m. But as Richard closed his laptop, he noticed something strange. One of his new cameras had recorded a soft glow near the children's room window. He replayed it, and for a brief moment, he saw a faint reflection of Claire, smiling gently before fading into the night. Richard exhaled, whispering, Greater than, thank you, for keeping them safe. But when they replayed the footage, the man was gone. The hallway and bedroom cameras showed nothing but empty space.